I'm Leo Miller, 34 years old, and my own parents told me I was nothing more than the labor in the company my grandfather built with his bare hands. Before I tell you how their biggest contract and a mountain of their debt ended up on my doorstep, do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Alright, let's get into it. The conference room at Miller & Son Steelworks always smelled like stale coffee and regret. It was a dark, wood-paneled box from the 70s that my dad, Richard, refused to renovate. He said it had character. I always thought it just had dust. I was sitting at the long mahogany table, my work boots looking out of place on the plush carpet. My hands were clean, but the grease felt permanently etched into the lines on my palms. Across from me sat my older brother, Ethan. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my first car, his hair perfectly coiffed, a confident smirk playing on his lips. He looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine about people who inherit success. My parents, Richard and Carol, sat at the head of the table. My dad cleared his throat, a sound like gravel turning in a cement mixer. As you know, he began, his eyes fixed on some point over my head. I've been thinking about the future of this company, about my legacy. It's time for new leadership, for a fresh vision. My heart hammered against my ribs. For a decade, I'd been the one on the floor at 5 a.m., the one welding custom joints until midnight, the one who knew every machine, every client, every quirk of the supply chain. I'd poured my blood, sweat, and youth into this place, believing that one day, my dedication would be recognized. My dad's gaze shifted to my brother, which is why I am officially announcing that Ethan will be stepping into the role of Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. The air left my lungs. It was a physical blow. I looked at Ethan, whose smirk widened into a full-blown grin. He gave me a little nod, like he was doing me a favor just by acknowledging my presence. I turned to my mom, hoping to see some flicker of protest, some sign of injustice in her eyes. Instead, she just gave me a soft, pitying smile. "Don't take it personally, honey," she cooed, her voice dripping with condescension. "You're amazing with tools, like truly gifted. But Ethan, he's got that big-picture energy." Big picture energy? He spent most of his days on the golf course or posting photos on Instagram with the caption, "Work hard, play harder." I finally found my voice, a rough, strained thing. He doesn't know the first thing about fabrication. He can't even read a blueprint. My dad slammed his hand on the table, making me flinch. "Enough," he barked. His eyes, cold and hard as the steel we sold, finally met mine. And then he said the words that shattered everything. "Look, Leo, relax. You're just the labor. Just the labor." 3 words. That's all it took to erase 20 years of my life. To reduce my entire existence in that building to a replaceable cog in a machine. Ethan laughed, a short, sharp sound. "I'll CC you on stuff, bro, don't stress." I didn't say another word. I just stood up. The legs of my chair scraped against the floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the suffocating silence. I looked at their faces. My father's dismissive glare, my mother's placid smile, my brother's triumphant sneer. And in that moment, I didn't see family. I saw strangers. Without looking back, I walked out of the room, out of the company, and out of the life they had laid out for me. But to understand how we got to that breaking point, to really get why that betrayal cut so deep, we have to go back. Way back. Miller & Son Steelworks wasn't my father's legacy to give away. It was my grandfather's. He started it after the war with nothing but a welder, a $1,000 loan, and a belief that a man's worth was measured by the sweat on his brow and the quality of his work. I grew up in his shadow, and his shadow smelled of ozone, hot metal, and hard work. While other kids were playing video games, I was in the workshop. Grandpa would hoist me up onto a stool, put a pair of oversized safety glasses on my face, and let me watch the blue-white fire of the welding torch as it fused 2 pieces of steel into one. He taught me the difference between a TIG and a MIG weld before I knew the difference between algebra and geometry. "See, Leo," he'd say, his voice a low rumble over the hiss of the machine. Steel has a memory. You heat it too fast, you cool it too quick, it gets brittle. It breaks under pressure. You gotta respect the material. You gotta have patience. He was talking about steel, but he was teaching me about life. About character. Ethan was never there. My brother was allergic to dust and hard labor. On the rare occasions my parents would drag him to the shop, he'd stand in the doorway of the office, pristine in his polo shirt and khaki shorts, looking at the grime and the sparks with a look of pure disgust. He'd complain about the noise and the smell, and within 10 minutes, he'd be back in my mom's air-conditioned car, playing on his Game Boy. I remember one Saturday, I must have been about 15. I'd spent the entire day helping my grandpa fabricate a custom gate for a wealthy client. It was intricate work with dozens of small, precise welds. By the end of the day, I was exhausted, covered in soot, but my welds were clean and strong. My grandpa ran his calloused hand over the joints, a slow, appraising gesture. He looked at me, a rare, genuine smile cracking his weathered face. "You've got the touch, kid," he said. "You've got my hands." It was the highest praise I had ever received. Just then, my mom pulled up with Ethan in the passenger seat. He rolled down the window. "Are you done yet? We're going to be late for the movie." My grandpa just shook his head slowly, a look of profound disappointment in his eyes. He never said a word about it, but after that day, he stopped trying to include Ethan in the business. It was just me and him, partners in sweat and steel. He taught me about integrity, too. I remember a time a big contractor tried to get us to cut corners on a support beam for a new building. He wanted us to use a cheaper grade of steel, one that wasn't up to code. He promised a huge bonus, all cash, no one would ever know. My dad was actually considering it. He saw the numbers, the profit margin. But my grandfather overheard the conversation. He walked out of his office, wiped his hands on a rag, and stood right in front of the contractor. He was not a tall man, but in that moment he seemed like a giant. "We don't put our name on garbage," he said, his voice quiet but absolute. "And we don't build things that could get people killed. You can take your business and your dirty money somewhere else." The contractor sputtered and left. My dad was furious about the lost revenue. But my grandfather just looked at me and said, "Leo, you can make a quick buck. Or you can build a good name. You can't do both. You remember that." I never forgot it. When he passed away, the company fell to my dad. And my dad respected the bottom line, not the material. He saw the company as an asset, a thing that generated income. He never understood the soul of it. He saw my skills as a useful, if dirty, necessity. He saw Ethan's business degree from a state college as the key to the future. It didn't matter that Ethan's business acumen mostly involved memorizing buzzwords from articles he'd skimmed online. To my dad, the man in the suit was always more valuable than the man in the work boots. The promotion Ethan got wasn't earned. It was an inheritance he felt entitled to from birth. And for years, I just accepted it. I told myself that hard work would eventually speak for itself. That my grandfather's lessons would somehow win out in the end. I was wrong. Dead wrong. After I graduated high school, I didn't even consider college. The company needed me. Or rather, my dad said it needed a reliable body on the floor, and my salary would be a fraction of what he'd have to pay a senior fabricator. So I stayed. My days started before sunrise and ended long after the sun went down. 70-hour weeks weren't the exception. They were the norm. I was the invisible engine that kept Miller and Son running. When a critical piece of machinery broke down at 3 a.m., who did they call? Me. When a client had a last-minute, impossible demand for a custom order, who figured it out? Me. I was the welder, the mechanic, the inventory manager, the shipping coordinator, and half the time, the janitor. I knew the name of every truck driver, the coffee order of every major client, and the exact spot on the forklift's engine you had to hit with a wrench to get it to start on a cold morning. My brother's contributions were different. Ethan was given the title of Director of Business Development. This mostly meant he took clients out for expensive lunches and golf games, all on the company dime. He'd come back to the office in the late afternoon, smelling of sunshine and overpriced cologne, and talk about synergy and disrupting the market. He once spent $20,000 on a new logo and a website that looked slick but had the wrong phone number listed for 3 months. The injustice was a low, constant hum in the background of my life. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. I'd come up with a new, more efficient way to organize the warehouse, saving us thousands in labor costs. A week later, I'd overhear my dad on the phone, congratulating Ethan for his brilliant logistical overhaul. The most blatant example happened about 2 years before I quit. We were competing for a major contract to fabricate the frames for a new line of emergency response vehicles. The specs were incredibly complex and required a new kind of welding technique to bond a lightweight alloy without compromising its strength. It was a problem that had stumped bigger companies than ours. My dad was ready to pass on the bid, but I was obsessed. For 3 weeks, I spent every night in the shop after my regular 14-hour shift, experimenting. I burned through scrap metal, I read technical journals, I called old contacts of my grandpa's. Finally, at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday, I figured it out. It was a combination of a modified TIG technique, a custom-mixed shielding gas, and a precise preheating and post-cooling process. It was tricky, but it was strong, light, and repeatable. I created a small prototype and tested it. It was perfect. The next morning, buzzing with excitement and a lack of sleep, I brought the prototype and my pages of notes into my dad's office. Ethan was there, sipping a latte. I explained the breakthrough. My dad was impressed. Ethan looked bored, scrolling through his phone. "This is great, Leo," my dad said. "This could land us the contract." 2 days later, there was a big meeting with the client. I assumed I would be there to explain the technical details. But when I was about to head to the conference room, my dad stopped me. "Leo, you're covered in grease," he said. "Maybe you should stay on the floor, keep things running. Ethan's got this." I watched from the workshop door as Ethan, in his crisp suit, stood before the clients. He had my notes, my prototype. He presented my breakthrough as his own. I could hear him through the glass, using words I had written, explaining a process he didn't understand. He called it the Miller alloy bonding method. He took all the credit. We got the contract. It was the biggest in the company's history. Ethan got a $50,000 bonus for his innovation. I got a pat on the back and my regular paycheck. That was the day the hum of resentment became a roar. They weren't just taking my labor. They were taking my ideas, my successes, my identity. They were hollowing me out, piece by piece, and I was letting them do it. I was so focused on respecting the material, I forgot to respect myself. I told myself it was for the good of the company, for the family. But it was becoming clear it was only for the good of Ethan, and for the perpetuation of my father's delusion. The first crack in my resolve appeared about 6 months before that final, fateful meeting. It came from the most unexpected of places. Mr. Harrison ran Harrison Steel, our biggest and most important supplier. He was an old-school guy, much like my grandfather. He was a man of few words, and his praise was rarer than a flawless sheet of stainless steel. He'd known me since I was a kid, and whenever he visited the workshop, he'd bypass my dad and Ethan in the office and come straight to the floor to find me. On this particular day, we were having issues with a shipment. The specs were off, and Ethan, who had placed the order, was on the phone yelling at some poor sales rep, making things worse. I quietly walked over, took the spec sheet, and called Harrison directly. "Mr. Harrison, it's Leo Miller," I said. "We've got a problem with the T304 shipment." I explained the technical issue calmly, precisely. He listened without interruption. "All right, Leo," he said when I was done. "I see the problem. It's our mistake. A new shipment will be on a truck within the hour. I'll handle it personally. No arguments, no excuses, just a solution." An hour later, as promised, the truck arrived. Mr. Harrison was in the passenger seat. He got out and walked over to me while his guys started unloading. He was a tall, imposing man, and he looked me straight in the eye. "Your brother," he said, not as a question, but as a statement. "He's going to run this place into the ground." I didn't know what to say. Felt like treason to agree. "He doesn't have the instinct for it," Harrison continued, as if reading my mind. "He thinks business is about talking. This business is about doing. He tries to bully my sales reps, he messes up the order codes, and he's always trying to squeeze us on price for specialty items. He doesn't understand that a good relationship is worth more than saving a few pennies on a dollar. He must have seen the conflict on my face. He put a heavy hand on my shoulder. I knew your grandfather for 30 years. He was a craftsman. You're a craftsman, Leo. What you do, that's the heart of this business. The rest is just noise. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the bustling workshop, the place I called home. This might be out of line, he continued, his voice lower now. But your talent is being wasted here. You're propping up a failing structure. You're a foundation holding up a house of cards. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. It was his personal card, with his private cell number scribbled on the back. The day you decide to build something with your own name on it, he said, pressing the card into my hand. You call me first. I'll extend you a line of credit, no questions asked. A man like you deserves to be his own boss. I stared at the card, the sharp edges pressing into my palm. Felt heavier than a block of steel. It was an escape hatch, a life raft I never knew existed. Thank you, sir, I managed to say. He just nodded. Don't thank me. Just don't let them break you. The world needs more builders. He turned and left. I stood there for a long time, the card clutched in my fist. I wasn't ready to use it. My loyalty, my misplaced sense of duty to my family, was still too strong. But for the first time, a dangerous thought took root in my mind. What if? What if I wasn't just the labor? What if I was the entire damn company? I didn't know it then, but that small card would become the cornerstone of my entire future. Leaving that conference room wasn't a decision. It was an instinct, a survival mechanism kicking in. Every cell in my body screamed, "Get out." I didn't go to my truck. I didn't drive home. I walked straight to the workshop floor. The familiar sounds of grinding, cutting, and hammering washed over me. But for the first time, they didn't comfort me. They mocked me. They were the sounds of my own cage. Jeff, one of our oldest welders, a man who had worked with my grandfather, looked up as I walked past. "Everything okay, Leo? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Something like that," I mumbled. I went to my locker, the same one I'd had since I was 17. It was covered in rust and old stickers. Inside was a change of clothes, a worn-out copy of a book on metallurgy, and my personal tools, the ones my grandpa had left me. They were old, perfectly balanced, and felt like extensions of my own hands. I carefully wrapped each one in an oily rag and placed them in my duffel bag. These weren't the company's tools. They were my inheritance. The real inheritance. I walked through the building one last time, a ghost in my own life. I saw the custom jig I'd built to handle that tricky order for Summit Logistics. I saw the patch I'd welded on the hydraulic press when my dad was too cheap to order a new part. I saw a decade of my life, a decade of 70-hour weeks, a decade of swallowing my pride, all laid out before me. I went to my dad's office. It was empty. They were probably still in the conference room, celebrating Ethan's promotion. On his pristine desk, next to a framed photo of him and Ethan on a golf course, was a notepad. I tore off a sheet, but it felt too formal. Instead, I grabbed a greasy napkin from the lunch table. With a pen from the dispatcher's desk, I wrote 2 words. "I'm done." I placed the napkin on the keyboard of his computer. Then I took the company keys out of my pocket, the key to the front gate, the key to the workshop, the key to the office, and set them down on top of the napkin. The gentle clink of metal on paper was the loudest sound I had ever heard. As I walked out into the blinding afternoon sun, I pulled out my phone. I didn't smash it. I didn't throw it. I simply held down the power button until the screen went black. For the first time in 10 years, I was disconnected. I was free. I had no idea what I was going to do, where I was going to go, or how I was going to make a living. All I knew was that I couldn't spend one more second being just the labor in my own life's work. The silence that followed was terrifying, and it was beautiful. For 4 days, I lived in a blissful bubble of silence. I stayed at my buddy Sam's place, sleeping on his couch. We worked on his old project car, drank cheap beer, and didn't talk about my family at all. My phone remained off, a dead black rectangle on his coffee table. It was the most peace I'd had in a decade. Meanwhile, back at Miller and Son, the engine I had been had not just stalled. It had seized completely. I pieced together what happened later from Jeff, who called me the second he heard I was back among the living. On day one, nobody really noticed I was gone. They probably figured I was sulking and would be back the next morning, tail between my legs. Day two was when the little things started to unravel. The morning shipment wasn't ready because no one had stayed late to prep it. The CNC machine threw an error code nobody recognized. Ethan, in his new role as CEO, apparently walked onto the floor, pointed at the machine and said, "Well, get it working." He was met with blank stares. Jeff told me he calmly explained to Ethan that the machine had a faulty sensor that I had bypassed with a custom bit of wiring, and only I knew how to reset it properly. Ethan just waved his hand dismissively and said, "Then figure it out." They lost half a day of production. By day 3, the chaos was escalating. That critical custom order for Summit Logistics, the one with the complex proprietary welds that only I knew how to do, was due. Their biggest client, Markham, the logistics coordinator from Summit, started calling. He was a no-nonsense guy who valued punctuality above all else. Ethan, I was told, assured him everything was on schedule and fully synergized. Jeff described the scene in the workshop as a comedy of errors. Ethan had printed out my old notes on the Miller alloy bonding method and handed them to the welders, thinking it was a simple recipe. But he didn't understand the nuance, the exact temperatures, the feel of the machine, the sound the weld should make. They wasted thousands of dollars in high-tech alloy as they produced a series of brittle, ugly, and utterly useless frames. Day 4 was the implosion. The Summit order was officially late. Markham was on the phone every hour, his voice getting progressively colder. The workshop was in a state of controlled panic. Deadlines were being missed, materials were being wasted, and morale had plummeted. Two of the younger guys, fed up with Ethan's clueless management, just walked off the job at lunchtime and never came back. Ethan, bless his heart, tried to lead. He held a meeting where he unveiled a new mission statement he'd written. According to Jeff, it was full of words like paradigm, proactive, and leveraging assets. He was trying to motivate a crew of overworked, underpaid welders with corporate jargon. Jeff said at one point, one of the older guys, a man named Dave, just asked him, "Ethan, do you even know how to turn on the plasma cutter?" Ethan went red and started talking about delegation and executive oversight. The final straw was when my father, for the first time in years, had to put on a pair of overalls and walk onto the workshop floor. He looked at the half-finished Summit job, at the pile of expensive scrap metal, at the confused and demoralized crew. Jeff said my dad just stood there, his face pale, and finally understood. They hadn't just given my brother a title. They had handed the keys to the kingdom to a jester, and the castle was starting to burn. That's when my brother, stripped of his bravado and reeking of desperation, finally picked up the phone to call me. On the evening of the 4th day, I finally turned my phone on. Sam had convinced me, "Dude, you can't just disappear forever. What if there's an emergency?" An emergency. The irony was thick enough to cut with a plasma torch. The moment the screen lit up, it exploded with a cascade of notifications. 32 missed calls. 50-plus text messages. The vast majority were from one number, Ethan. The texts were a masterclass in narcissistic panic. They started with arrogance. "Hey, where are you? Got work to do." Then moved to annoyance. "Seriously, bro, this isn't funny. Get back here." Then to veiled threats. "Dad is pissed. You're messing things up." And finally, to sheer, pathetic desperation. "Leo, please call me. It's an emergency. Summit is going to pull the contract." I was reading that last text when my phone started ringing again. It was him. I let it ring for a moment, savoring the sound. I took a slow sip of my beer. Then I answered. "Hello," I said, my voice perfectly calm. "Leo, thank God. Where the hell have you been?" He sounded breathless, frantic. "You need to get down here right now." The summit order is a disaster. We're going to lose them. Markham is going to have my head. There was no apology. No, how are you? No, I'm sorry about what we said. Just a panic stream of demands. He still saw me as a tool, a wrench to be picked up to fix his problem. I was silent for a beat. I let him stew in his own panic. Leo, did you hear me? I don't have time for games. Sounds like a tough situation, I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. Tough? It's a catastrophe. I need you to come in and do those special welds. You're the only one who knows how. Am I? I asked. That's funny. I thought I was just the labor. The line went dead quiet. I could almost hear the gears grinding in his head as my words sank in. This is not the time for that, Leo, he finally sputtered. The family business is on the line. It stopped being my family's business 4 days ago, I replied, the words tasting like freedom. You're the CEO now, Ethan. You've got the big picture energy. You handle it. But I can't, he whined, his voice cracking. I don't know how. I took another sip of beer. Then I guess you should have thought of that before you decided my life's work was a footnote in your promotion. I was about to hang up when a wave of inspiration hit me. I gave him the best piece of advice I could. Ask the CEO, I said. Then I hung up. I blocked his number, and my dad's, and my mom's. A minute later, my phone rang again. An unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. Hello, Leo? It's Markham, from Summit Logistics. His voice was tense. I just got off the phone with your brother. I'm pulling the contract. But I have a question for you. What are you doing next? The world stopped spinning. It wasn't an accusation. It was an offer. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't just leaving something behind. I was starting something new. Markham's question was the spark I needed. That night, Sam and I sat in his garage, surrounded by car parts and half-finished projects, and we drew up a plan on the back of a pizza box. Sam, who worked a dead-end IT job he hated, saw the same thing I did, a chance. He had about $20,000 in savings, money he'd been setting aside for a down payment on a house. Forget the house, he said, his eyes shining with excitement. Let's build something. We can actually do this, man. The next morning, I made the second most important call of my life. I dialed the number on the back of Mr. Harrison's business card. He answered on the first ring. Leo, I was wondering when you'd call. I explained the situation, that I was out, that I was starting my own small operation in a garage, that I had nothing but my skills and a friend with a bit of cash. I asked him if his offer of a line of credit was still on the table. He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. Leo, my offer wasn't just on the table. It was waiting for you at the front door. What do you need? I gave him a modest list of raw materials, enough to get started on some smaller jobs to build capital. Consider it done, he said. It'll be there tomorrow. And Leo, the first invoice is on me. A welcome to the neighborhood gift. Now go make your grandfather proud. I hung up, stunned. The generosity of this man, who was practically a stranger, was a stark contrast to the callousness of my own family. The next day, just as he'd promised, a Harrison steel flatbed truck pulled up in front of Sam's suburban house, much to the confusion of his neighbors. They unloaded a pristine stack of high-grade steel onto the driveway. It was beautiful. It was hope, forged and delivered. The first few weeks were brutal. We spent Sam's entire savings on a used TIG welder, a plasma cutter, and basic safety gear. We worked 18-hour days, turning his garage into a functioning workshop at night and taking on tiny repair jobs during the day, fixing broken lawnmowers, welding cracked patio furniture. We were making tens and twenties, not thousands. The pressure was immense. There was one terrifying week where we were down to our last $200, eating ramen noodles and wondering if we had made a massive mistake. The electricity bill was due, and we were short. Felt like we were on the verge of failure before we had even begun. Then, on a Friday afternoon, an email came in. It was a purchase order from Markham at Summit Logistics, along with a notification that he had wired us a 50% deposit for that first small job he'd promised. It was for $5,000. I've never been so relieved to see a number in my life. It was more than just money. It was a lifeline. It was validation. We weren't crazy. This could actually work. We needed a name. Sam wanted something cool and techy. I wanted something that spoke to quality and precision. We landed on Apex Custom Fab. It sounded professional. Sounded real. We spent $50 on a cheap website and printed out business cards at a local copy shop. We were officially in business. The first official job for Apex Custom Fab was for Summit Logistics. It was a fraction of the work he'd had with my old company. But for us, it was everything. Sam and I worked for 48 hours straight. I did the fabricating, my welds cleaner and more precise than ever before. Sam handled the paperwork, created a professional-looking invoice, and kept the coffee coming. We delivered the racks a day ahead of schedule. They were perfect. Markham was floored. He paid the invoice within the hour and promised more work was coming. But he also did something else, something I never asked him to do. He started talking. He told people in the industry what had happened. He told them about the quality of Apex's work, and he told them about the chaos at Miller & Son. The word spread like wildfire. A week later, I got a call from Jeff, the veteran welder from my old shop. "Leo," he said, his voice hesitant. I quit today." Ethan tried to blame the whole Summit fiasco on the floor crew. Said our lack of engagement was the problem. I couldn't take it anymore. "Listen, are you guys hiring?" I was shocked. "Jeff, we're working out of a garage. I can't pay you what my dad was paying you." "I don't care," he said, and I could hear the conviction in his voice. "I'd rather take a pay cut and work for someone who respects the craft than take orders from that empty suit for one more day. I worked with your grandpa. You're cut from the same cloth. I want to build things right again. I'm not the only one. A couple of the other guys feel the same way." That weekend, Jeff and 2 other former Miller & Son employees came over. We had a barbecue in Sam's backyard, and by the end of the night, they were my first employees. This wasn't just a company anymore. It was a crew. It was a team built on mutual respect. The exodus had begun. Miller & Son wasn't just losing clients. They were bleeding talent. They had lost their engine, and now they were losing all the vital parts that went with it. They had made a choice between the brain and the hands, and they were quickly discovering that a brain can't build a damn thing without hands to do the work. Just when things were starting to feel stable, my past showed up on my doorstep. Or rather, on Sam's doorstep. I was in the garage grinding down a weld when Sam poked his head in. "Leo? You have a visitor." He had a weird look on his face. I cut the power to the grinder and pulled off my safety mask. Standing in the driveway, holding a large casserole dish wrapped in aluminum foil, was my mother. She was dressed to the nines, looking completely out of place next to a pile of steel offcuts. She put on her best wounded mother face as I walked out. "Leo, honey," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I brought you your favorite, lasagna." I stared at the dish. For my entire life, that lasagna had been her weapon of choice. It was the "I'm sorry" after an argument, the "please forgive me" for a forgotten birthday, the "everything's fine" when it clearly wasn't. It was a dish layered with pasta, cheese, and emotional manipulation. "What do you want, Mom?" I asked, my voice flat. I didn't invite her in. "Can't a mother visit her son?" she said, trying to force a smile. "I've been so worried. You just disappeared." "I quit," I corrected her. "There's a difference." She sighed dramatically, placing the lasagna on the hood of Sam's car. "Leo, this has gone on long enough. Your father is beside himself. Ethan is trying his best, but the company needs you. We need you." She launched into a sob story about the struggles at the company, the lost clients, the stress. She talked about family, about loyalty, about my grandfather's legacy. She tried to make me feel guilty, telling me how my departure was affecting my father's health, how Ethan was so stressed he wasn't sleeping. "He's your brother, Leo," she said, her eyes welling up with crocodile tears. "He needs you. Family is supposed to help each other. Family is also supposed to respect each other." I shot back. "Where was this concern for family when you were calling me the labor?" She waved her hand, dismissing it. "Oh, honey, that was just words. A misunderstanding in a moment of stress. You know your father didn't mean it like that." I just stared at her, my silence more damning than any argument. She saw it wasn't working, so she switched tactics. She tried to appeal to my ego. "You're the only one who can fix this, Leo," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You're the real talent. We all know that. Come back and things will be different. We can give you a new title, Vice President of Operations. We'll make sure you get the credit you deserve." It was a tempting offer, a siren song of validation I had longed to hear for years, but I had heard enough empty promises to last a lifetime. I didn't say anything. And then, she made her fatal mistake. "It's just terrible timing," she lamented, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue. "Your father was just about to close on a new business loan to upgrade the equipment. But the bank is getting nervous. They said that with our chief technical expert gone, our risk profile has changed. They might pull the funding." And there it was. It wasn't about me. It wasn't about family. It was about a loan. I wasn't her son. I was a line item on a bank application. I was a name that lowered their insurance premiums and secured their financing. My promotion to this new, important-sounding title was a fiction created for a loan officer. The last flicker of guilt I felt was extinguished, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. I looked her straight in the eye. "So, you're not here to get your son back. You're here to get your asset back." The smile vanished from her face. She saw that the old tricks weren't working anymore. "That's not fair, Leo." "No," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "What's not fair is using your son's favorite meal to try and trick him into saving your company so you can secure a loan. What's not fair is calling me just labor 1 week and chief technical expert the next, depending on who's listening." I picked up the lasagna. It was still warm. "Thank you for this," I said. "The guys and I will enjoy it for lunch." I turned to walk back to the garage. "Wait," she called out, her voice now sharp with panic. "What should I tell your father? The bank needs an answer by Monday." I stopped at the garage door. "Tell him Apex Custom Fab is willing to discuss a subcontracting agreement to help complete his back orders," I said, without looking back. "Our rates are competitive, and we require a 50% deposit upfront. Sam will send over the paperwork." I walked into the garage and closed the door, leaving her standing alone in the driveway with her empty hands and her failed manipulation. The annual Tri-State Manufacturing Conference was the biggest event of the year in our industry. It was a place to network, see new technology, and, for people like my brother, a place to preen and posture. This year, Miller & Son had sponsored a keynote presentation. The speaker, the new CEO, Ethan Miller. His topic, Innovative Solutions for Modern Fabrication. It was a joke. I was there with Sam. Apex Custom Fab had a tiny booth in the back corner. But we were there. We were official. We were part of the conversation. I had deliberately avoided my family, but I couldn't resist sitting in on Ethan's presentation. I had to see the train wreck for myself. Ethan strode onto the stage like he was Steve Jobs unveiling the first iPhone. He was slick, confident, and utterly full of it. He started his presentation and my blood ran cold. The project proposal he was showcasing, a complex, multi-stage fabrication plan for a new municipal bridge, was mine. It was a passion project I had been developing in my spare time for months, a proposal I was going to pitch to my dad to show him I had the big picture energy too. I'd left the files on my old office computer. He had just put his name on it and changed the logo. He was clicking through the slides, stumbling over the technical terms, clearly not understanding the engineering behind the designs. I felt a surge of white-hot rage. He wasn't just taking credit for my past work. He was stealing my future. But as I watched, I noticed something. He wasn't presenting my final version. He was presenting an early draft, one where I had been working through some initial, flawed concepts. It was a version riddled with subtle but critical errors, inefficient material use, non-compliant weld specs for public infrastructure, a timeline that didn't account for curing times. To a layman, it looked impressive. To an expert, it was a disaster waiting to happen. Ethan finished with a flourish, and there was a smattering of polite applause. He had a smug look on his face, thinking he had nailed it. Then, the conference organizer stepped up to the microphone. "Thank you, Ethan. And now, for a special commentary on industry best practices, we're honored to welcome Mr. Walter Finney." Walter Finney was a legend, a semi-retired structural engineer who literally wrote the book on fabrication standards. My heart leaped into my throat when I saw Mr. Harrison sitting in the front row, watching Walter with a knowing look. Walter, a kindly-looking man with sharp eyes, walked on stage. "Thank you," he said. "I'd like to use the previous presentation as a practical, real-world case study on some common pitfalls in project bidding. If we could put that last slide back up." Ethan's proposal reappeared on the giant screen. A nervous murmur went through the room. For the next 10 minutes, Walter Finney, in the calmest, most professorial tone imaginable, systematically and brutally dismantled my stolen proposal. He pointed out every flaw, every miscalculation, every violation of state and federal code. He called the material specs dangerously optimistic and the timeline a fantasy. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He just used facts, figures, and decades of expertise to expose the proposal for what it was: the work of an amateur. "A proposal like this," Walter concluded, looking out at the silent audience, "is not just unprofessional. It's a liability. Any decent lawyer would tear it apart, and any city that accepted it would be setting themselves up for a catastrophic failure. This is a textbook example of how not to do business." The silence in the room was deafening. Ethan stood at the side of the stage, his face the color of ash. He looked like he was going to be sick. My dad, who was in the audience, looked like he had been punched in the gut. Then, during the Q&A, someone asked Walter how he was able to spot the flaws so quickly. Walter smiled faintly. "It helps when the real designer of the project points them out to you beforehand." He nodded towards the back of the room, directly at me. Every head in the auditorium turned. They stared at me, then back at Ethan, the pieces clicking into place. The theft, the incompetence, the public humiliation, it was complete. I hadn't said a word, but I had won. This was the moment everything changed, the moment I finally took back control of my own narrative. Thank you for sticking with me to this point. You're amazing. If you're still here, do me a huge favor and like this video and drop a 1 in the comments below, just so I know you made it this far with me. It doesn't just help more people find this story. It lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone out there. Your support is the single biggest reason I can continue to share the rest of this journey. The fallout from the conference was immediate and brutal. Ethan became a laughingstock. The story of his public humiliation spread through the industry like a virus. Miller and Son, already on shaky ground, became toxic. The few remaining clients they had started to pull back, spooked by the display of incompetence and apparent plagiarism. My family, however, did not respond with apologies or introspection. They responded with rage. And with lawyers. About a week after the conference, a courier delivered a thick envelope to the workshop. It was a cease and desist letter from a high-priced law firm. It was full of intimidating legal jargon, but the message was simple. They were accusing me of stealing intellectual property, my own ideas, ironically, poaching employees, and violating a non-compete agreement I didn't even remember signing. They demanded that Apex Custom Fab immediately halt all operations or face a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. My heart pounded as I read it. A lawsuit could ruin us. We were just starting out. We didn't have the money to fight a protracted legal battle with an established firm. For a moment, I felt the old fear creeping back in. Maybe they could still crush me. Sam, ever the pragmatist, read the letter over my shoulder. "A non-compete?" he said. "When did you sign a non-compete?" I vaguely remembered signing a stack of hiring paperwork when I was 17, fresh out of high school. My dad had just pushed the papers in front of me and said, "Sign here, here, and here. Standard procedure." I was a kid. I didn't read the fine print. I trusted my father. It was a rookie mistake, and I was about to pay the price for it. We spent the next 24 hours in a state of panic, calling every business lawyer we could find. Most of them told us the same thing. Fighting this would be expensive and risky. Finally, we got a recommendation to see a lawyer named Rich. He was an older guy who specialized in manufacturing and contract law. We sat in his cluttered office, and I told him the whole story. He listened patiently, nodding occasionally. When I was finished, he took the letter and the copy of the non-compete I had signed as a teenager. He read it and then he started to laugh. A deep, hearty laugh. "This," he said, holding up the document. "This is what they're threatening you with? This isn't worth the paper it's printed on." He explained that a non-compete agreement forced on a minor with no specific compensation for signing it, in a situation where I was effectively forced out of the company, a concept known as constructive dismissal, was completely unenforceable in our state. It was a scare tactic, an empty threat designed to bully me into submission. "They don't have a case, Leo," Rich said, leaning back in his chair. "Their own lawyer knows they don't have a case. This is a bluff. A big, expensive, stupid bluff." He drafted a response letter for us. It was a work of art. It was professional, polite, and it systematically dismantled every single one of their claims, citing the relevant state laws and legal precedents. It ended with a sentence that made me smile. "Should you choose to proceed with this frivolous litigation, we will be seeking full reimbursement for all our legal fees, as well as filing a counterclaim for tortious interference." We sent the letter. We never heard from their lawyers again. The war wasn't over, but they had just wasted their last bullet. A few weeks after the legal threat fizzled out, my father showed up at the workshop. Alone. It was late. The rest of the crew had gone home. I was sketching out a new design, enjoying the quiet. I heard a car pull up, and when I looked out the garage door, I saw his old Cadillac. My whole body tensed. He didn't get out right away. He just sat in his car, the engine off, staring at the brightly lit garage that was once his son's hobby space and was now his biggest competitor. Finally, he got out and walked slowly towards me. He looked older, smaller than I remembered. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. He wasn't wearing a suit, just a simple polo shirt and slacks. He stopped at the edge of the concrete, not quite stepping into my workspace. We stood there in silence for what felt like an eternity. The only sound was the buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead. He looked around the workshop at the state-of-the-art equipment we'd managed to acquire, at the neatly stacked racks of steel, at the complex project I was working on. His eyes lingered on the Apex Custom Fab logo we'd stenciled on the wall. "Your grandfather would have liked this place," he said finally, his voice raspy. It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest he was probably capable of getting. "Yeah," I said. "I think he would have." More silence. I could see the struggle on his face. He wanted to ask me to come back. I could see the words forming on his lips. He was a drowning man looking for a life raft, and he was about to ask the son he had thrown overboard to come back and save him. Before he could say it, I spoke first. "It's over, Dad," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. What I have here, this is my future. I'm not coming back. I'm not going to fix what you and Ethan broke." He flinched, but he didn't argue. "I will always be your son," I continued, and the words felt heavy, important. "And you will always be my father. If you ever want to have a relationship on those terms, my door is open. But the business relationship, that's done. Miller & Son and Apex Fab are two separate companies. That's a line we're not going to cross again." I was drawing a boundary not just for him but for myself. I was closing the door on the hurt and the hope that had defined my life for so long. I was choosing to be a son, not a savior. He just stood there, a silhouette against the darkening sky. He nodded slowly, a single tired gesture of defeat. He didn't say another word. He just turned, walked back to his Cadillac, and drove away. I watched his taillights disappear down the street. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel anger. I just felt quiet. The storm had finally passed. 1 year can change everything. 12 months after my father stood at the edge of my garage workshop, Apex Custom Fab was unrecognizable. We had moved out of Sam's garage and into a 10,000 square foot facility on the industrial side of town. The space was bright, clean, and filled with the hum of brand-new, computer-guided machinery. We had gone from a crew of 3 to a team of 15, including some of the best fabricators and designers in the state. Sam, who had quit his IT job, was now our COO. He had a natural talent for logistics and management that he never knew he had. Jeff was my shop foreman, his years of experience now being put to good use training a new generation of welders. And we had made one more key hire, Sam's cousin, Derek. Derek was a quiet, nerdy genius with a master's degree in mechanical engineering. He was a wizard with 3D CAD software. His arrival transformed our business. We weren't just a fabrication shop anymore. We were a full-service design and engineering firm. Clients could come to us with a problem, just a vague idea, and we could take them from a digital concept to a physical, perfectly engineered solution. It was a service Miller and Son could never hope to offer. Our reputation grew. We became known for taking on the difficult jobs, the ones that required creativity and precision. We built custom components for aerospace companies, intricate frameworks for architectural installations, and high-performance parts for race teams. One of our first big projects in the new facility really put us on the map. A new tech company was building a massive solar farm in the desert, and they needed custom mounting brackets that could withstand high winds and extreme temperatures while also tracking the sun. It was a complex engineering challenge. Miller and Son had actually bid on the project and failed spectacularly, submitting a clumsy, over-engineered design that was wildly over budget. Derek and I locked ourselves in the design office for a week. We went through dozens of iterations using advanced stress simulation software. We came up with a revolutionary design, a lightweight, honeycomb-structured frame made from a recycled aluminum alloy. It was stronger, lighter, and cheaper to produce than anything the competition had proposed. We presented our design to the tech company's board. They were skeptical at first, a bunch of Silicon Valley types looking down their noses at a small fab shop. But when Derek walked them through the 3D simulations, showing how our design distributed stress under a simulated hurricane-force wind, their jaws dropped. We didn't just win the contract, we blew them away. That project led to 2 more, and suddenly, Apex was a major player in the renewable energy sector. I wasn't working 70-hour weeks anymore. Well, most of the time, my role had changed. I was no longer just the labor. I was a leader. I spent my days collaborating with Derek on designs, meeting with clients, and most importantly, mentoring my crew. I made sure every single person who worked for Apex felt valued, respected, and essential to our success. I paid them well, offered full benefits, and fostered a culture of innovation. We weren't just building things out of steel, we were building a community. Our success was a stark contrast to the news I occasionally heard about Miller and Son. They were a ghost ship, still afloat but dead in the water. They had downsized twice, selling off most of their best equipment to stay solvent. Ethan, I heard, was still technically the CEO, but he rarely showed his face at the shop. The company that had once been a regional powerhouse was now just a shadow of its former self, a monument to arrogance and bad decisions. I felt a twinge of sadness for my grandfather's company, but I didn't feel an ounce of guilt. I hadn't destroyed it. I had simply stepped out of the way and let it collapse under the weight of its own incompetence. As I stood on the balcony overlooking my bustling workshop, a year to the day after the conference, I felt a sense of profound peace. I had lost a family, but I had built a new one. I had been cast out, and I had created a kingdom of my own. Life has a funny way of bringing things full circle. 2 weeks before the next Tri-State Manufacturing Conference, the one where Apex Custom Fab was now a major sponsor, I received a letter in the mail. It was a simple white envelope, addressed to me at the new facility. The return address was my parents' house. My name was written in my father's familiar, spidery handwriting. My first instinct was to throw it away. I was done with the drama, the guilt, the emotional games. But my curiosity got the better of me. I slid it open with a utility knife. It wasn't a plea for help. It wasn't an angry tirade. It was a single page written on a sheet of plain paper. Leo, it began. I don't know if you'll read this. I wouldn't blame you if you didn't. There aren't any excuses for the way I treated you. For the things I said. For the things I failed to see. I visited your grandfather's grave last week. I go there sometimes just to think. I was standing there, looking at his name on the stone, and I realized something. He built this company with his hands. He loved the work. He loved the steel. I never did. I loved the idea of the company, the status it gave me. I saw it as a business, a machine for making money. I forgot that a machine needs an engineer, needs a soul. You were the soul of that place, Leo. For years. You were the one who had your grandfather's hands, his heart. You kept it alive, and I was too proud and too blind to see it. I chose the salesman over the craftsman. I chose the suit over the overalls. I chose wrong. I sold the majority of the business last month. There was too much debt. We're keeping a small percentage, just enough to get by. Ethan is no longer involved. He's trying to find his own way now. The Miller and Son your grandfather built is gone. Maybe that's for the best. Maybe it needed to die to pay for my mistakes. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm not asking for you to come back. I know that ship has sailed. I am just writing this to say that I see it now. I see you. And I am proud of the man you've become, even if I have no right to be. That. I read the letter 3 times. The words were simple, clumsy even, but they were honest. It was the confession of a broken man. A man who had lost his legacy and was finally taking a hard look at the ruins. There was no magical reconciliation. The years of hurt didn't just vanish. But as I folded that letter and put it in my desk drawer, I felt a final, heavy chain break away from my heart. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was closure. It was the acknowledgement I had craved my entire life, delivered not in a moment of triumph, but in a quiet moment of defeat. His defeat. I realized then that my journey wasn't about proving him wrong. It was about proving myself right. And I had. To celebrate our 2nd anniversary, we threw an open house at the Apex facility. We invited everyone. Our clients, our suppliers, our employees, and their families. We had a barbecue, live music, and shop tours. The place was packed, buzzing with laughter and energy. Mr. Harrison was there, holding court by the new plasma cutting table, telling anyone who would listen that he knew the kid had it in him from the start. Markham was there with his whole team from Summit Logistics, our very first and now our biggest client. My entire crew was there, their spouses and kids looking at the massive machines with awe. It felt less like a corporate event and more like a giant family reunion. My new family. Late in the afternoon, I stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. I was leaning against the wall, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and purple, when I saw a familiar car parked across the street. A BMW. Ethan was sitting in the driver's seat. He just sat there watching the party from a distance. He wasn't angry or menacing. He just looked lost. A king in exile, observing the vibrant new kingdom that had been built from the ashes of his own failure. Our eyes met for a brief second across the expanse of the parking lot. I gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. Not of forgiveness, but of acknowledgement. He didn't respond. A moment later, he started his car and drove away. I didn't feel hatred. I didn't feel pity. I felt nothing at all. He was just a ghost from a past life, a life that no longer belonged to me. I walked back into the party, back to the noise and the warmth and the community we had built. Sam clapped me on the back and handed me a cold beer. "To Apex," he said, raising his bottle. "To Apex?" I echoed, clinking my bottle against his. I looked around at the empire we had built in 2 short years. An empire built not on a fancy degree or a family name, but on skill, on respect, on sweat. An empire built by hand. And I smiled. The funny thing about being called just labor is that labor is what builds everything. It builds families, it builds companies, and it builds empires. And I was just getting started. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I truly hope it resonated with you in some way. It's a long and complicated journey, but sharing it makes it feel a little lighter. I have a question for all of you. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt completely undervalued, either at work or in your family? What did you do about it? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one. And please, Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. Your support means the world to me.